Let's see some more examples of the observer pattern in action. Since it's such an important design pattern, seeing more examples will help us realize how often it's used, make us more prepared for implementing the observer as a part of our code. This time, we'll look at tree edits and mouse clicks. Tree. The tree is basically a graphical representation of data. You can display nodes in a tree and use that to navigate between the various nodes. We look at how tree edits and mouse clicks are implemented and see how they use the observer pattern. The example that we are looking at is in Swing. Trees in Swing are rather complicated. The class which defines a tree is called JTree. That is the main UI element which displays the tree, displays the nodes, and you can configure it a whole bunch. But you'd never use JTree alone. JTree alone isn't enough to express all the information that goes with the tree and all the interactions that goes with the tree. A host of associated classes need to be used in addition to JTree. Now, what are these associated classes? An example is the tree node object. Tree node objects are basically nodes in that tree and are contained within a tree. The nodes which appear in the UI rendering of a tree are tree node objects. In addition, we have tree model objects. This is the underlying data which we use to display the tree. The tree model is the model for which the JTree is the view. As the underlying data changes, the tree needs to be updated in some way. Maybe a new node has been added, maybe a node has been removed, maybe a node has been renamed. A tree model is explicitly needed for such operations which require updating the tree. A new node has been added is just one such example. All right, what are the listeners that are associated with a tree? We can have tree model listeners and tree selection listeners. Tree model listeners operate on the data which is represented in the form of a tree, and tree selection listeners operate on the UI. What are tree model listeners? Tree model listeners listen for changes in the model, that is the underlying data of a tree. Has a new node been added? Is there extra data? Has data been removed? These are what the tree model listeners will tell us. Listening to the tree model using a tree model listener will give us information about the underlying data. Now, the view component of a tree, the actual rendering of a tree, this uses a tree selection listener. Tree selection listeners listen for changes in the view or the UI representation of a tree. So you know that UIs are built using the model view controller paradigm. These are listeners on the model and listeners on the view. So we use tree model listeners when the tree data changes and the tree UI needs to be updated in order for it to be in sync with the underlying data. And we use tree selection listeners when the user has performed some action on the tree. The most common action that we perform as a tree is to select a different node. When we select a different node in the tree, we use a tree selection listener to get information about this. So when the user has selected some nodes in a tree and other UI elements need to be updated to stay in sync with the selection, that's where you'd use a tree selection listener. Let's go on to our next example, capturing right clicks of a mouse and reacting to a right click. Now in Swing, every UI control is a J component. And every J component, which means every UI control, allows programmers to listen in on mouse events. If you think about how you interact with UI, you basically click on a whole number of mouse controls. How do you listen to mouse events? In Java, you can implement the mouse adapter interface. The mouse adapter interface has the add mouse listener method, which is present in every UI element. So basically, you have the mouse adapter interface and you listen in via the add mouse listener method, which is present in every UI element. Now, with these methods, it's possible that to examine the mouse event that occurred. You'll know whether it was a click, you'll know whether it was a double click, you'll also know whether it was a right click. Typically, what do you do when a user right clicks on a mouse? You show a context menu or a pop up trigger. You can examine the event that came with the mouse click, know whether it was a right click, and perform the right action. Once again, all of these are the observer pattern in action.